When I first purchased the farm, I did it for the quiet, the kind of quiet where the loudest interruption was the wind combing through tall grass. The gravel driveway only ever saw my truck, and the only unexpected crossings were deer stepping cautiously from one tree line to another. That calm held steady for about a year. Then, the subdivision beyond the ridge discovered the narrow trail cutting across the back of my acreage. It wasn't a proper road. It had never been paved, graded, or listed on any county map. It was just a faded dirt strip left behind after a utility crew passed through once for maintenance work. But somehow, someone decided it was convenient. Word spread. Before long, I was seeing compact cars, lifted pickups, and even golf carts gliding across my pasture like they were taking a scenic detour. Welcome to Prodigy Tales. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy premium HOA drama. And leading that parade was Karen. Karen chaired the local Homeowners Association, and she treated that worn trail like it had been deeded to her personally. She'd roar across my field in her bright yellow Lamborghini Urus, engine snarling, suspension bouncing over the uneven ground. One afternoon, I stepped out and flagged her down. "Ma'am, this isn't a public road," I told her. "I need you and your HOA members to stop cutting through." She lowered her window just enough to be heard. "Oh, please," she sighed, nudging her oversized sunglasses higher on her nose. "We've been driving through here for months. It's a little late to change that now, don't you think?" "I don't think so," I answered. Her lips curled into a smirk. "And what exactly are you going to do? Arrest us?" Before I could respond, she revved the engine and shot forward, blasting a cloud of dust across the freshly seeded ryegrass I had just planted. At first, I tried the reasonable approach. I installed clear, polite signs along the entrance to the trail. Private property. No trespassing. Within a week, 2 had been knocked flat, and another ended up propping the rear wheel of some teenager's dirt bike. One evening, I caught an HOA board member parked squarely in the middle of my land, sipping an iced latte with his window down. I reminded him again that this was private property. He chuckled. "Relax, man. It's just a shortcut." Maybe to them it was just convenience. To me, it was my livelihood. The repeated tire tracks were carving deep ruts into the soil. My livestock were getting nervous from the constant noise. And when I mentioned the situation to my insurance agent, he warned me plainly, if someone were injured while cutting through my land, I could be held responsible. That was the moment everything changed. Polite conversations don't work on people who believe they're exempt from rules. If Karen didn't understand courtesy, maybe she would understand consequences, specifically gravity. I spent the next week experimenting with smaller deterrents. I parked an old flatbed trailer directly across the path, assuming a physical barrier would make the message obvious. Karen simply swerved around it, cutting straight through my young orchard. Next, I strung a bright plastic chain between posts and attached red flags so no one could claim they didn't see it. 2 days later, the chain was sliced apart and tossed into my irrigation ditch. I installed a motion-activated camera to capture license plates. Someone spray-painted the lens. I placed bright orange construction cones across the entrance. Karen barreled through them without slowing down and even waved at the replacement camera as she passed. So I made a call. I contacted my insurance adjuster and posed a hypothetical scenario. If I were to dig a trench on an unused section of my property, clearly marked, not on any easement or public road, would I be liable? He replied carefully, "If it's fully on your land, not obstructing a legal right-of-way, and the hazard is properly marked, you're within your rights." That was all I needed to hear. I checked the forecast and waited for rain in the coming days. On Saturday morning, I got to work. I dug a trench across the trail, not extreme, just enough to catch a low-clearance vehicle. 3 feet deep, 5 feet wide. I outlined the edges with bright orange stakes so the boundary was visible. Then I mounted a durable weatherproof sign that read, "Private land, trespass at your own risk, not a public road." Clear, direct. After that, I laid a plastic tarp across the trench and scattered straw lightly over it. I didn't disguise the warning signs. I didn't set any illegal traps. I simply created a visible obstacle on my property, one that any reasonable driver would pause to evaluate. And before anyone could claim ignorance, I emailed the HOA board one final notice. The subject line was simple and direct. Final notice, unauthorized shortcut use. In the body of the email, I kept my tone professional. I explained that due to ongoing property damage and increasing liability concerns, the trail cutting through my land was officially closed. I made it clear that it was no longer safe for vehicle traffic and that anyone choosing to proceed would be doing so at their own risk. Karen never replied. But the following morning, I stepped outside and saw fresh tire marks pressed deep into the wet soil. That was the moment I stopped framing the situation in terms of fairness. I started thinking in terms of boundaries. And as I stood there, staring at those muddy tracks carving through my pasture, I understood something clearly. Karen wasn't going to stop because I asked nicely. She would only stop when something made her. And that something was already waiting. Tuesday afternoon arrived with heavy clouds hanging low in the sky. The kind that threatens rain without fully committing, leaving the earth damp and slick. I was sitting on my porch with a thermos of coffee, eyes fixed on the ridgeline. By then, I had trained myself to listen for engines, especially hers. The Lamborghini Urus wasn't exactly subtle. I heard it before I saw it. That deep, aggressive growl of a twin-turbo V8 echoed across my field like a challenge being thrown down. Moments later, she crested the hill and began descending the trail, mud kicking up behind her tires. She drove with the same confidence she always had, the confidence of someone who believed consequences were for other people. She never slowed down. She hit the trench going at least 25 miles per hour. The front wheels dropped first. The nose of the SUV slammed downward with a violent jolt. A split second later, the rear end bounced upward like a seesaw before crashing back down with a metallic thud carried across the pasture. The Urus stopped at a sharp angle, stuck fast. Steam began hissing from beneath the hood. For about 10 seconds, there was no movement. Then the driver's door flew open. Karen stepped out slowly, staring at the vehicle as if her brain refused to process what had just happened. Her designer boots sank into the mud as she circled the SUV, one hand gripping her phone while she barked frantic words into it. I remained exactly where I was on my porch, sipping my coffee. The tow truck arrived roughly 40 minutes later. The driver surveyed the scene, let out a low whistle, and muttered, "That's going to be expensive." I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. As they attempted to extract the SUV, the sounds were unmistakable. Metal scraping against metal. The undercarriage is grinding against the edge of the trench. One of the exhaust pipes twisted at an awkward angle. The suspension sagged unevenly. The tow driver winced. Karen screamed. And me? I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, but because, for once, a boundary had been met with reality. She had finally collided with something she couldn't talk over, intimidate, or drive around. When they finally pulled the mud-soaked Lamborghini, free-looking less like a luxury SUV and more like a failed rally car, Karen turned and spotted me on the porch. She didn't speak. She simply glared. I lifted my thermos slightly in acknowledgement and gave her a small nod. She turned away, furious and humiliated, speckled with mud thrown up by her own recklessness. The following day, I braced myself for retaliation. A legal threat. HOA representatives are marching up my driveway with clipboards. Something dramatic. Instead, there was silence. Not peaceful silence, tense silence. The kind that builds pressure quietly. By Thursday, a thick envelope appeared in my mailbox. Official HOA letterhead. Dense paragraphs of legal phrasing. They requested clarification regarding the obstruction I had placed in what they described as a commonly used route. I responded with one sentence. The route in question is private property, has never been granted as an easement, and is clearly marked as closed. Along with that sentence, I attached documentation, property boundary surveys, GPS overlays, time-stamped photographs of posted warning signs, copies of my warning emails, and, of course, detailed photos of the bright yellow Lamborghini Urus resting nose first in the trench. Karen is climbing out. Mud everywhere. By Monday, the HOA went completely quiet. Not a single vehicle used the shortcut again. It was over. As for Karen, she never attempted to cross my land after that. Occasionally, I'd see her vehicle crawling along the long paved road that looped around the hill. Traffic slowed her to a crawl. No shortcuts. No privileges. Just like everyone else. I heard through town chatter that the dealership declined warranty coverage for the repairs. Something about owner negligence. Word was that the suspension alone cost over $20,000. The underbody repairs pushed it even higher. Karen, who once carried herself like royalty in a turbocharged throne, now avoided eye contact whenever our paths crossed in public. She never apologized. Never admitted fault. She didn't have to. The silence. The detour. The permanent end of the shortcut. That was enough. One afternoon, while repairing a fence post near the edge of my property, I saw her driving along the distant paved road. For a brief second, she glanced toward the old trail. It was already starting to grow over with weeds and tall grass. Then she looked forward again and kept driving. I tipped my hat toward the trench. It had done its job. Sometimes the strongest fences aren't made of wood or wire. Sometimes they're 3 feet deep, 5 feet wide, and built with nothing more than a shovel and a clear point to prove. The end.